So after 7 serials of varying quality, we end the season on another historical, but this time written by Dennis Spooner, an experienced writer known for his humour within his scripts. But can his serial compete with the high bar already set by previous historicals? But as I've already watched it, I know, and so will you, either by watching this review or the actual serial, or both, it's up to you. But before we start, it's important to note that this is a missing serial, but unlike Marco Polo, is only partially missing, with only episodes 4 and 5 missing. Now there is an animated reconstruction for the serial, but I watched the Telesnap reconstruction instead, as I'm not that keen on the animation style. While there are some nice shots, the mix of styles for the faces against the bodies is jarring, and then the cutting in some scenes is distracting. It doesn't match the other episodes, and so takes me out of it. Although I may use clips from the animation for this review when talking about a scene, but I'm unsure. So as established with the last serial, the Doctor is planning to drop Ian and Barbara off wherever the TARDIS lands next due to an offhand comment. To cut a long story short, the quartet don't leave things on a sour note, when Ian proposes they all have a drink before parting ways, something which tempts the Doctor, alongside Ian's other suggestion that he may never land in the same place again, so this may be his one chance to explore, although for season 1 Doctor, it's probably the drink which does most of the legwork. And to cut another long story short, the quartet discover they are in France when they meet a boy who speaks with an English accent, and they realise it's during the Reign of Terror when they find some papers in the house. The papers bear the signature of Robespierre, the chief orchestrator of government during 1794. I'll explain the house later, but it's a stop on the route for helping counter-revolutionaries escape, although admittedly that's basically everything to it. Here they meet 2 counter-revolutionaries before being captured by a band of revolutionary soldiers, leading to the deaths of the counter-revolutionaries and the house being set on fire, while the Doctor is still inside. So the Doctor was captured by the counter-revolutionaries and awakens from unconsciousness as the house begins to burn. And I think this scene is a perfect cliffhanger, as it really helps to set the tone for the serial. The Reign of Terror, both the serial and the actual period in history, is or was brutal. This period in history was at the darkest point of the French Revolution, where between 35,000 and 45,000 people were killed through massacres and executions. Now I'm not an expert on this period of history, and won't pretend to be, because that would be stupid, and so I won't go into depth, because then I'll just be reading the Wikipedia page. And so if you're interested, I recommend searching out a far more informative source on the topic, as it's not my place nor intention to spread false information on such a heavy subject such as this. I will only reference more general information about the period when it's necessary. So the brutality of the serial. Despite being a show for children, both Spooner's script and Henrik Hirsch's direction don't sugarcoat it. The cast are split up and go through many different forms of horror. The Doctor is trapped in a house which is set alight and begins to succumb to the smoke. The rest of the quartet are thrown into cells facing execution by guillotine, during which Susan becomes ill from the conditions of the cells, notably being an alien who had previously suffered radiation poisoning. Conditions which include rats being in the cells, injured or dying people being left in the cells, and a complete lack of cleanliness. The Doctor can't prove he pays his taxes and so is forced to do labour. Several people who were distrustful of the quartet report them to the authorities with very little evidence. The glee and mockery of onlookers watching people being taken to the guillotine, and of course the executions by the guillotine itself. Now how much of this would have gone over kids' heads is a question, but it's pretty dark stuff for the time slot, and is laid on heavy, really helping to show the darkness of this time. In previous historicals there was someone with power looking after or assisting the quartet, which lowered the stakes somewhat, while allowing a sense of danger. But this time the quartet are basically on their own, and the only people they can turn to are the enemies of the state. Despite this being Earth, the threat is perhaps the most deadly they've faced so far. With the quartet split up, the Doctor is saved by the English boy, and learning that the others were captured, decides to go to Paris to rescue them. And being the old man he is, he decides to stride to Paris, or 12 kilometres, in some pretty nice location filming. In Paris, the rest of the quartet are sentenced, with Barbara and Susan standing next to each other, while Ian stands by himself in the film insert. If you don't know where I'm going with this, then you clearly haven't been paying attention in the previous reviews. But anyway, they're thrown into the cells, one of which only existing in pre-filmed inserts, because William Russell had his 2-week holiday during episodes 2 and 3, which led to a slight problem for the serial. Now as stated in earlier reviews, Ian was basically the main character in season 1, which is why when Hartnell was on holiday, not a whole lot changed. But with Ian unable to interact with the greater plot, it means that the serial has to slow its pace a bit, and put events in motion that will allow for things to be introduced and the main plot to get going when the holiday ends. This works out in a few ways. For one, we have the Doctor trying to rescue his companions, and Susan and Barbara meeting with the counter-revolutionaries who created the path and network to get counter-revolutionaries out, the house being a stop on the path, and Ian being given some information which will allow another character to move things along, including Ian's escape from the cells. Starting with Barbara and Susan's plotline, they attempt to escape by digging out of the cell, but this fails due to rats, meaning they are taken to the guillotine, but on the way are rescued by 2 counter-revolutionaries, Jules and John, who attack the horse and cart taking the girls to the guillotine. They are taken to a safe house where we learn about the details of the other house being a safe house, which Jules and John had been using to get people out. We also meet Leon, who Barbara shows an affection for, and Susan's health deteriorates further. Meanwhile, the Doctor is still striding to Paris, encountering a chain gang which he is made a part of after insulting the leader. He escapes by using the leader's greed against him, stealing a few coins and dropping them into the dirt so that the leader will begin digging himself, allowing the Doctor to... Okay, so the Doctor's more violent side is still showing. I mean, he didn't kill the guy, but jeez. This isn't the only time he does this, as later he smashes a bottle over the head of the jailer when trying to free Susan. Considering we learned in episode 1 that the Reign of Terror is the Doctor's favourite period in Earth history, you have to wonder if they've been here before, especially since in An Unearthly Child, Susan is reading a book on the period and says that it's wrong. So the question is, how many people has the Doctor hit over the head? Is this why he likes it so much? Anyway, so the Doctor reaches Paris and trades his entire outfit and his ring, notably, for the uniform of a regional officer, and words cannot describe it.
Who is in charge of this prison?
This is a Doctor who knows how to impress. He goes to the prison to rescue his friends, but they've already escaped. But he meets Government Officer Lemaire, a high-ranking official who has access to Maximilian Robespierre, the first deputy of the Covenant being the governing assembly during this period. This meeting leads to a meeting with Robespierre, in which the Doctor shuns his ways.
I'm only interested in your comments on your own territory. Recent memoranda from your province suggest that the purge of our enemies in your region is progressing very slowly.
Oh, you've reached that conclusion. Perhaps we have fewer enemies in our region, and it may be that Paris can take an example from us.
The dialogue here is great, the way the Doctor is able to perfectly counter Robespierre, but his own responses are annoyance or distaste. The Doctor immediately makes the topic of conversation on the state of Paris itself, with Robespierre deflecting from it. But the Doctor manages to keep on track and slyly insults Robespierre's way of handling the situation.
We in Paris are aware of the danger, citizen. We live in troubled times. There is much work to be done. Work that is constantly delayed by the need to ferret out the traitors that we harbour in our midst.
Is there such a need, Citizen Robespierre? I mean, what can this reign of terror possibly gain? For every opponent you put to the guillotine, 2 more will spring up.
And I have to say, this is one of the strongest moments for the Doctor in this season. This confrontational side to the Doctor hasn't been that present throughout the show so far, or at least in the way it's present here. But now he's by himself, facing one of the most evil people he's come across, and he's somewhat toying with him. Much like when he met with Ian and Barbara, he's using his greater knowledge to attempt to put Robespierre in his place. But unlike the first interaction, he now has a different side to him. He's not lording himself over Robespierre, but talking sense to him. He understands the dangers he could face, and isn't overstretching. Ian, in the meanwhile, has escaped from his cell after meeting with a dying Englishman named Webster, who gave him a message to give to a James Sterling. He was told to gain the assistance of Jules René, the man who saved Barbara and Susan. This eventually leads to their reunion after Ian has been captured by Jules and John. Although this reunion is short-lived as Barbara takes Susan to a physician to treat her, which leads to them being recaptured, when the physician turns them in. And this is the perfect time to talk about the tailor and the physician's actions. After the Doctor trades his clothes and ring with the tailor reveals this information to Lemaitre. Lemaitre keeps the Doctor's ring, paying a small reward for the information and likely to also keep the tailor's mouth shut. The physician is similar. When he meets Barbara and Susan, he locks them in his place of work and immediately goes to inform the jailer, as he believes them to be escaped prisoners, due to Susan's condition. And these are the moments that show the side of the Reign of Terror which is hidden below the surface. The mistrust and deceit. With counter-revolutionaries on the run during this time, anyone thought to be a counter-revolutionary was executed or imprisoned. If you weren't completely loyal to the state, then you were in danger of execution, and that is what these characters show. Although their suspicions are right, these two work towards their own personal gain or survival by turning in people who have not done anything to them, on little evidence and far more suspicion. And the fact that the quartet have no alignment to either side means that they are innocent bystanders in the events of the revolution, although this of course can't compare to the actual people who supported the revolution and were killed due to this fear. The tailor and the physician aren't necessarily bad people, they're just scared for their lives and are doing what they can to ensure their protection from the state, who could turn on them out of its own fear. So the Doctor reunites with Barbara and is able to allow her escape by deceiving the jailer, although their conversation is eavesdropped by Lemaitre. Meanwhile, Ian has gone to a crypt to speak with Leon, believing him to have a connection, if not in fact be James Sterling. But Leon reveals himself to be a revolutionary and captures Ian. Leon was the one who revealed the location of the house to the revolutionaries and has been leaking information. And while it's a good twist, this is where the story's biggest problem appears, or is at least its most notable. Now, as an educational historical, learning why the French Revolution and the titular Reign of Terror occurred is an important job for the serial to do, but it doesn't occur. As Ian and Leon talk, the only information we get about the beginning of the revolution is Leon's line,
"I've been loyal to the revolution from the beginning. If you'd known what France was like 6 years ago before the Bastille, you'd understand."
And the problem is evident. While events are referred to, there is no detail given. The serial works off the idea that the audience has knowledge on the time period rather than explaining it. Now perhaps this is because in the 1960s the French Revolution was a more heavily discussed or taught subject than it is today, but watching it now I have very little idea of what the Bastille is or what France was like before it, and this is something I don't have the knowledge to discuss in depth. But for a little context, the Bastille was a fortress in Paris which on the 14th of July 1789 was stormed by revolutionaries in what is described as the flashpoint of the French Revolution. Now it does make sense for characters not to discuss these events so blatantly, as they would be well known to the people in Paris at the time, but nobody in the serial alludes to anything, and so the historical aspect is left to people looking it up after the fact, which is a far more difficult thing for someone to do in the 1960s than now, as information wasn't so easily available as it is today with the internet. Now I'm not insulting Spooner here, as the script is still very good, but the lack of information about the events which has led up to the events of this serial do weaken it somewhat. The stakes are high, but don't have the sort of reasoning behind them which gives them their fullest impact. The revolutionaries end up being presented as purely evil, as the story is very black and white. Giving the historical information would have given the shades of grey needed to make the characters and setting feel fully flushed out. There are hints of this greater depth when Ian and Barbara are discussing Leon's treachery.
He was a traitor to you. To his side, he was a patriot. The revolution isn't all bad. Neither are the people who support it. It's changed things for the whole world. And good, honest people gave their lives for that change.
Well, he got what he deserved.
You check your history books, Ian, before you decide what people deserve.
But even then this doesn't go into the motivations, simply he was doing what he thought was right, which is a start but is just a surface level statement, and it does feel more driven by the slight romance which was being formed between Barbara and Leon. Ultimately we don't understand Leon's motivations on the deeper level, or that of anyone else involved. This is the serial's weakest aspect and it hurts Leon as a character the worst. So Ian was saved by Jules, and this is where all the different plot lines come together, as the Doctor brings Lemaitre to the rest of the characters. As Susan is still in the cells, the Doctor's hand is being forced in order to have her freed. It first appears that the Doctor has betrayed everyone, but Lemaitre reveals that he is in fact James Sterling. We also learn that Lemaitre, Sterling, was behind Ian's escape, having removed him from the list of executions and is the one who knocked out the jailer. So this is another great twist, much like with Leon's change of side, but this one has been far more hinted at as a subtle mystery, and so previous events begin to make more sense, notably why Sterling took such an interest in Ian and Webster, and why he didn't immediately turn the Doctor in when he was clearly lying about his identity. Ian gives Sterling the message to return to England and about the sinking ship, which leads to the realisation that there is to be a secret meeting as part of a conspiracy against Robespierre. This leads to an undercover operation with Ian and Barbara posing as innkeepers. The secret meeting goes ahead with it being revealed that the meeting is between a man named Barras and Napoleon Bonaparte, who is being offered a place in government when Robespierre is overthrown. Admittedly, this does feel like more of a way to put Napoleon in the serial than having much plot relevance, as it reveals details about what's going to happen with Robespierre, but it just sort of happens. To explain what I mean, they are in Jules's house, then they are in the inn, and then they're back in Jules's house discussing the meeting. Given that there's nothing going on at the same time, it feels a bit odd, although the dialogue in this scene is great. With the darker tones of the serial in the background, it means that the dialogue can have a bit more flair than before. The scene leads into one between the Doctor and Barbara. Like every other scene between them is great. Barbara finds it somewhat amusing that they're playing a part, like they can do anything about it. Barbara knows that no matter what they do, Robespierre will be arrested and guillotined, and she mentions how she learned that from the Aztecs. And the Doctor's final line in the scene is amazing. There's a gladness that Barbara understands, but somewhat of a regret that he couldn't do anything, even if he wanted to. Ending on,
I'm afraid so, and we can't stem the tide. But at least we can stop being carried away with the flood. Now, Susan and the prisoner.
This Doctor has come a long way, and it shows in Hartnell's performance here. Meanwhile, Ian and Sterling attempt to stop the arrest of Robespierre. It is an interesting decision given how Robespierre has been presented as the tyrant of France, and responsible for everything wrong with Paris and the wider country at the time, although I wouldn't say illogical given the alternative. But they fail and Robespierre is arrested, being shot in the jaw in the process. Finally, the quartet reunite and return to the TARDIS, through a montage of maps. The TARDIS takes off, leaving France behind them, and the quartet have a final reflection. Interestingly, the reflection seems to start partway through, as it opens with the Doctor responding. This leads into a continued discussion of how they cannot change time, with Susan giving her own input.
Suppose we'd written Napoleon a letter, telling him, you know, some of the things that were going to happen to him.
Wouldn't have made any difference, Ian. He'd have forgotten it, or lost it, or thought it was written by a maniac.
I suppose if we tried to kill him with a gun, the bullet would have missed.
Before the serial and the season ends, there's a final speech by the Doctor.
Our lives are important, at least to us. But as we see, so we learn.
And what are we going to see and learn next, Doctor?
But unlike the old adage, my boy, our destiny is in the stars. So let's go and search for it.
And you know what? It's a nice scene. After an entire serial of being split up and working to get together again, the quartet can finally relax and rest in each other's company, reflecting on their importance in the universe. A perfect way to end the season without being too over the top. Now you may have noticed that I haven't really mentioned Susan all that much in this review, and that's because she doesn't do a lot. She's mostly paired up with Barbara for the first half, and then once recaptured is used more as an idea so that there is leverage over the Doctor and a reason that they can't leave. She gets ill, which leads to her recapture, but that's most of her impact past episode 1, and sadly that's kind of it for Susan. Her impact on the serial is minimal, and acts almost entirely as a damsel in distress, although she does scream a little less than usual. Next we have to talk about the humour in this story. Now Spooner is somewhat of a comedy writer, which is something you'll see in a lot of his serials, but with the serial featuring such dark subjects, humour would be in poor taste. And through excellent writing, Spooner pulls off his injection of humour into the script. Apart from his flares in the dialogue when people are talking, the scenes of the Doctor striding to Paris are very humorous, and even when he meets the chain gang, the leader of it is played for laughs, set against the people working, leading to the Doctor hitting him over the head. The jailer is used in a similar way. He is a funny character due to his fumbling. But there are no laughs in the cells. Spooner effectively separates the dark subjects from the lighter laughs, causing the script to be incredibly engaging. So The Reign of Terror is a very good serial, and surprisingly dark for the audience and time slot. Its biggest failing is that it doesn't do anywhere near enough to inform the viewer about the actual Reign of Terror and the French Revolution, which reduces the depth of the characters. But the dialogue just pulls you in, and the almost unrelenting view of how dark this time was is unique. A great ending to the first season, showing most of the quartet at their best.